Your vibrato has multiple settings, baby, and I'll show you how you can change up your vibe. So let's start with the basics. If you don't already know, vibrato is when your voice sort of swings instead of going straight. So instead of it's ah. You have one note, but there are little swings between pitches that lies right above or right under that note, normally. Children and untrained singers usually don't have vibrato, but there are exceptions to that, like this little gem. And why we have vibrato, like not the stylistic choice of it, but why we have it from nature's side, is that it protects your vocal folds against tension. So it's a natural thing that occurs. Don't be discouraged, don't feel bad if you don't have vibrato naturally. It can totally be learned. And singers, trained singers, also use it in a way, like they can add it. They don't always use their natural vibrato, they can add it and they can mold it in several ways. We'll get to that later. But yeah, you can totally learn it. And by doing an unnatural vibrato, there are several techniques for that. And by doing that, you can learn to get that natural vibrato. And it's not even just about creating that thing. It's also about supporting right, doing all the other right things to help that fall into place naturally. But yeah, it can totally be learned and tweaked in different ways. We'll get to it. So what trained singers use vibrato for is to support the tone and to add fullness to the tone. And it's also used to add suspense. You know, a singer can, for instance, hold a note flat until they let the vibrato kick in, like on a really big, long note that they build up. So yeah, vibrato is also used to add variation, create suspense. There are several ways to use vibrato to add dynamic variations, even in short phrases. And one thing about vibrato, as with the rest of your voice, to be agile, to have everything function the way you want, it's best to be warmed up. Your vibrato sounds totally different warmed up from what it does cold. When you're warmed up, you have more ability to shape your vibrato, to make it faster and all that. But when you're cold, when you haven't warmed up, when I say cold, obviously your vocal folds are located inside your body, so it's technically not cold, but it's like with muscles, you know, you have to warm them up, to stretch them, to sort of soften them up, to have them function the way you want them to. It's the same with your vocal cords. You have to sort of stretch them, to soften them, to make them more agile so that you can have that faster vibrato. Because when it comes to speed, younger people usually have faster, more trillier vibratos, and older people usually have slower vibratos, but it all depends on training, you know. Everything can be trained and maintained. Some changes are bound to happen with our bodies, but a lot of stuff can be worked on too. It's like muscles, you know, they are muscles too, and cartilage and a lot of things. And while we're on the subject of slow vibrato, a trained singer is able to switch up the speed of their vibrato. They can go slower or faster to fit the rhythmical subdivisions of a song. And this can also be used in jazzy styles, you know, when they mimic instruments, like when they mimic brass instruments. And you can also switch up the speed for different expressions and even the pitch. You know, Rihanna does this really cool thing where she goes, instead of going above and below the note that she's singing in her vibrato, she sort of only dips up, you know, and sort of a big dip or spike, I guess, a big spike up instead of going up and then. And here's another example by Ariana Grande. There are also different techniques, or should I say different styles of vibrato. And I'm not just talking about, you know, the speed and the pitch, but like different things that actually happen physically. So the first one I want to talk about is hammer vibrato, or vocal cord vibrato, because it's sort of created with your vocal folds. Hammer vibrato sounds almost like a tremolo because it's a series of little attacks with your vocal folds. You know, you have Post Malone, seasons change but I love when cold, and it can almost sound like a sheep that's, what do you call it, bleeding, like ba ba, because it's on one note. You don't swing above and below the note, as in the other type of vibrato I'm going to talk about, but instead it's like on the same note, like a series of little attacks, like But when you learn to control that, it's going to sound softer. And, you know, one example of who uses hammer vibrato, I would say listen to Edith Piaf. She has a lot of that hammer vibrato quality. So yeah, she would be a good example too, not just Post Malone and Sheep. And one final thing about hammer vibrato is that it can also be used to learn to sing cleaner runs, like more defined runs. So yeah, you should look into it. It's definitely a good tool to have, you know, and you can train it to sound softer and not so, you know. I don't usually use hammer vibrato. It's only when I'm mimicking Sheep or Post Malone. What I use is a laryngeal vibrato. It's also called a throat vibrato because it doesn't only occur like the hammer vibrato on your vocal folds. It occurs like several places around your larynx, in your larynx, and around, you know, your tongue, your jaw can even be a part of that. And the laryngeal vibrato, I would say, is more common, but don't quote me on that because I don't have statistics on it. But it's what I hear more from most singers. It's the laryngeal vibrato. With that, you have more options when it comes to pitch. You have a bigger range because, you know, the hammer vibrato is just on that one note basically, but with the laryngeal vibrato you swing between pitches and you can change that so there's more of the top pitch or more of the bottom pitch depending on the expression that you want. And this is also where you can, it's easier at least to change the tempo to fit the subdivisions. It's kind of difficult to do the hammer vibrato any slower. So with a hammer vibrato, you don't have that many options, but with the laryngeal vibrato, you have more options when it comes to speed and pitch. So with this, you have a bigger pitch range to choose from in your vibrato. You know, you can have big pitch changes or smaller pitch changes. You can do faster vibrato, slower vibrato. You have way more options with the laryngeal vibrato than you do with a hammer vibrato, but both have its function still. Oh yeah, so basically what happens with the laryngeal vibrato, it's kind of in the name. It's your larynx, laryngeal, your larynx, which is where, you know, your vocal folds sit. It's the vocal box. I guess you've heard that name for it. The larynx is your vocal box. So the laryngeal vibrato means that your larynx sort of move up and down. There are several things that can play into that. The root of your tongue sort of moves with it too and helps your larynx move up and down. And you've probably seen some singers where their jaw moves up and down. Like when they do the vibrato. For me, I don't think I'd use that because I think I would just tense up my jaw by doing that. But I guess if it occurs naturally to you, then that's a good way for you. You know, as long as you don't strain or like tense up your jaw. And if people have a really nice loose tongue and a loose jaw, you can create a really distinct vibrato like in jazz. And speaking of genres, you know, different genres have different preferences for vibrato. You know, in pop, what is pop? Pop is basically any music that's popular at the moment, so there are less rules there. But if we use rock and classical music as an example, a classical singer, like an opera singer, in an opera you would generally have the vibrato present from the start of the note. But as with a rock singer, the vibrato would typically not be present from the start of a note, unless we're talking, you know, those nice poodle screams or stuff like that. But in a verse, typically a rock singer wouldn't start the note with a vibrato on it. So yeah, different genres have different preferences. Vibrato is a great tool and it also protects your vocal folds, so it's a really great thing to learn. If you don't have it naturally, like I said, you can learn it. Children, untrained singers usually don't have it, but it can be learned. Fret not, my friend. So it's a useful tool, it's healthy, but there is such a thing as too much vibrato. And that's when it's uncontrolled. And it's called a wobble. Like it sounds wobbly. It's not a control vibrato. And that's when it's too much and a singer can't control it or sort of shut it off. And this can also happen when you get older and when your voice gets more frail. But also young and untrained singers can have this. And what tends to happen with older singers is more that their pitch, like the range within the vibrato, becomes really wide, so it's like and kind of slow, you know. If you vibe with this video, give it a thumbs up and leave a comment, and if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.